Q.
All right, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Faye D'Souza. Compliments of the season. Season's greetings to all of you. Thank you for your patience while I was away last week. We're back now, though. Several things have happened in the last 1 week that require attention, not the least of which was a terrible event that took place in Haridwar, and also a parallel event in Delhi. It was called the Dharam Sansad. It was a 3-day event between 17th and the 19th. A series of videos from that event have gone viral now, which contain hate speeches targeting specifically the Muslim community and calling for violence against them in a way that cannot be mistaken for anything else. According to the Indian Express, it was the very controversial Yati Narasingha Anand, who is also facing several FIRs in Uttar Pradesh, who called for a war against the Muslim community in India. There were several other statements made. For example, Hindu Raksha Sena's Prabodhanand Giri was heard saying, and I quote, this is also from the Indian Express, like Myanmar, our police, our politicians, our army, every Hindu must pick up weapons and conduct a Safai Abhiyan, which is a cleansing. There is no other option left, he said. According to NDTV, the video also shows a Pooja Shakun Pandey, aka Sadhvi Annapurna, saying, and I quote, if you want to finish them off, then kill them. We need 100 soldiers who can kill 20 lakh of them to win this, end quote. Now, the police have registered an FIR quite helpfully and made no arrests whatsoever. 2 people have been named in that FIR, one Dharamda and one Annapurna. And also they had named Wasim Rizvi or Jitendra Tyagi, whose name is now Jitendra Tyagi. In the meantime, 76 lawyers have written to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, N.V. Ramana, requesting him to take suo motu cognizance of the hate speeches. Quite rightly, I must confess, I personally agree with the letter. The letter says the speeches delivered during the event were not merely to be treated as hate speeches, but amounted to an open call for murder of an entire community. And thereby, and I'm quoting the letter now, it says, pose a grave threat not just to the unity and integrity of our country, but also endangers the lives of millions of Muslim citizens. The opposition has called for action, but we must actually step back and take a look at this, in perspective with everything else that's happening. There have been a series of attacks, vandalism attacks specifically. No one has been hurt, I must point that out, against churches in India. Some schools have been interrupted while they were celebrating Christmas in various parts of the country. Specifically, Karnataka has been seeing some of that happen. And we've seen a sort of heightening of communal senses in our country. We're going to ask some important questions. We're going to ask legal questions, technical questions, right? This is not about emotion. One, do we agree with the statement made in that letter that the Supreme Court needs to step in because this not only endangers the integrity of our country, but endangers the lives of a large number of people of a particular community? Is there a, is there a legal cause here for the police to have not made a single arrest? Because we've seen the police make arrests in, for example, the Delhi riots cases, where they said that this speech that you made has caused the riots, and so we will arrest you, and those people are still in jail. So is there a double standard at play right now? Is the police doing its job? Are governments doing their job? These are the questions that we're asking. Joining me this evening to answer those questions, Sanjay Hegde, Senior Advocate with the Supreme Court, and Mr. Yashovardhan Azad, former Special Director, Intelligence Bureau, and also Central Information Commissioner, Secretary, Security, Government of India. So top cop, really, who's going to be able to answer all of those questions for us. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Mr. Azad, coming to you first. FIR has been filed. A couple of people have been named. No arrests have been made. Does this seem adequate to you? Well, would you say enough is being done? Mr. Azad?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Please go ahead.
There is no doubt that the action has come late, and it's not really an action because without arrest, registering an FIR doesn't mean anything, because this is not an ordinary crime. It's a hate crime. And therefore, the arrest should have been made immediately. In fact, when I was speaking on some of the channels, and the FIR was yet to be lodged, and people gave that, the police gave that typical reply, "Hum dekh rahe hain." It was clearly obvious that they were trying to sort of dither and trying to get some kind of a conversation with their senior authorities on the issue, which tells you that there is a background to this case. Uttarakhand is going in for the elections, and the political executive is actually very, very indulgent towards this. There is also another thing that a political party man, some Upadhyay, was also there at the function. So that is exactly why the arrests are not taking place. And in this context, I actually think the courts must step in. In fact, I'm very happy that these 76 lawyers have filed a petition with the Supreme Court, because if the court does not take suo motu or on this petition action, I can assure you that the action will be not taken, or it will be so delayed, or it will be so muddled, or it will be put up in such a way that ultimately the case will drag on and there'll be no result, which we have seen in most of the cases. And the second point is, which we come back again and again, and Mr. Sanjay Hegde and I have been talking on this issue, that what happens is that the police appears to be, shorn of good leadership. Police appears to be dumbfounded. Police appears to be almost distant from such critical things which are happening, which are basically an attack on the secular character of our constitution. And I think this will continue, Faye, unless we think of some kind of autonomy or some kind of an action-oriented institutions in our country. And for that, we have to put our heads together. What do we? Because in this democracy, I don't think we expect any kind of.
Mr. Azad, it does seem to me that you're suggesting that the police is not going to take action because this type of speech has political blessing or political protection. Would that be?
Well, I won't say it has. I won't say that the politicians have really asked them to make these speeches. That is not true. But then the speeches of this kind are not acted upon. Let me tell you also another thing. There is a kind of a fear or a kind of a vote wishing whenever a pandit or a mullah or all the people arraigned on these religious sides make statements. Remember, there was this guy in Maharashtra who said 15 crore Musalman, hum 100 crore Hindu ko dekh lenge. And there was somebody in Hyderabad who also made an open statement कि police थोड़ी देर के लिए हट जाएं, हम इन सारे हिंदुओं से निपट लें. Nothing happens in these cases. So, you have these strongholds at various places. And I'll tell you another thing. Most of the executive officers are told to keep excellent relations with the mutt chiefs and the masjid chiefs. So maintain the communal harmony. So that for communal harmony, you don't have to apply the rule of law, but you have to apply something else. Your begging abilities, ki dekhiye ye mat karwaiyega, ab aap hi to hamare malik hai. And therefore, they are the ones who actually have the upper hand. That's the sorry state of affairs.
Mr. Hegde, do you agree or do you think that there is something larger going on in this country right now? I also want to point out statements made by BJP MP Tejasvi Surya, which he has now apparently rolled back, but fairly inflammatory themselves. Would you say that it's necessary for the Supreme Court to step in at this point?
Well, I don't think it's an option for the Supreme Court to not do anything. There is a letter right now. It's not a petition. It is not a petition by the lawyers. It's just a letter to the Chief Justice saying that this is something where you could, which you should look into. The Chief Justice has several options. He can, if he's so minded, say that, look, I am not the police station in charge. First, use the normal methods of law. If they do not work, then we step in. There is also the option that the Chief Justice has of using his authority to ask pertinent questions. Just one summoning of a senior law officer and asking him, I have received this letter. Should I now take a suo motu cognizance, or will your government take action? That is enough. A lot of these things happen, as Mr. Azad will confirm later. These are things which are just indicated. I had a judge who once told me that he observed the newly sworn in Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, N.T. Ramarao. On the first day when the police chief came up, you must remember that before N.T. Ramarao came into power in Andhra Pradesh in 83, Hyderabad was a city, especially the old city, was driven by communal riots.
Yeah.
The police chief came in, N.T. Ramarao looked at him and said, look, I want no communal riots during my time. They do not benefit me, they benefit no one. And as long as he was in power for the next 5 years, apparently there were no communal riots. Mr. Azad will further confirm to you that, none of these things, none of these hate speeches, none of these riots happen unless the police are deliberately told to look away or not to get tough on things. People who shout all these obnoxious things when in a crowd are basically people who will dare not do it by themselves. A few arrests at the right point of time, a few preventive arrests, or even a summoning to the police station is enough to send a message. Why was this not done in Haridwar? Why was it encouraged in Haridwar? These are questions that the local police will have to answer. And yes, we've seen another viral video of another politician who said, look, when this man is not the chief minister, when this man is not the prime minister, who will protect you? And there the answer, and I think that is the real answer. The answer is that if a policeman follows the constitution and the law, he need not fear any government, whether it is government X in power or government Y in power. It is only when you listen to the government first and keep the constitution aside, that is when people get into trouble. So 400 years ago, I think Shakespeare wrote, had I served God with but half the zeal I served my king, he would not have in my old age left me naked to my enemies. I think those are words that every authority who is in an office by virtue of the constitution should remember. Kings come and go. The constitution endures, and our job is to protect it.
Mr. Azad, do you expect then, as we inch closer and closer towards the Uttar Pradesh elections, that these sort of incidents will likely increase or continue?
Well, it's evident that these kind of things will happen. And you see, before the elections, there are a few predictable actions which are taken on behalf of the central government, or somehow the enforcement agencies come on the alert and income tax becomes very active and enforcement directorate becomes very active. Let me tell you two things about it. One is, I think it's quite clear that before the elections, because that's the context in which we are talking now, before the elections, the ruling party is very, very keen also to block the trail of funds of the opposition. So suddenly these raids start coming up. And secondly, the second point is that to whip up the vote bank in a kind of a frenzy and keep it going, these kind of actions or indulgent attitudes are going to continue. Especially now, this is a very serious case, the Haridwar case. And I'm telling you, in the context that even otherwise, if any communal incident takes place or something which will precipitate a communal action, the policeman either is hesitant or he looks away. He's hesitant. Some of them who are good policemen are hesitant because they think if they get into it, there's going to be inquiry and it's going to go on and on and on. And some commission is going to be appointed and nothing is going to happen, but their harassment will continue. Secondly, when it happens with the benign attitude of the ruling party, as it were, then of course there is no action or an action in such a way which will give you a muddled kind of a results. So in either case, I feel it is quite clear to the judiciary, and thanks to Mr. Hegde for correcting me, it is not a petition, it's a letter, it's an appeal, it's something which has gone to the Supreme Court judge, and he has to take an action now, because if he doesn't take, it is going to set a real bad precedent, and we are going to sink further and further in this. Because the executive action, mind you, is very, very difficult. And I'm telling you, it's easy to say that, yes, the police should stand up. The DGP should stand up. The Home Secretary should stand up. The Chief Secretary. But Chief Secretary and Home Secretary are virtually the arms of the government to fulfill their agenda mission, their electoral promises and all that. You can't expect them to do it. And if you do it, you're kicked out. How many times will you be kicked out? So you kill your conscience many a times to do this. It's a very, very serious issue which needs to be deliberated. But unless all the parties come together and deliberate on the issue, it's going to be difficult.
Mr. Hegde, what are the options before the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court right now in response to this letter?
I've told you the options. He can take it up himself. He can convert the letter into a petition, and then thereafter ask for an explanation from the Uttarakhand government. That is one thing. The other thing is that there are several things which are not necessarily done in the public eye.
Yes.
If the law officers of the government are told, look, this is not on, and unless I see action, I will have to take it up on the judicial side. There would be enough action which will follow very fast. But there are other things which the court can do. See, one of those gentlemen, that's for lack of a better word, happens to be a lawyer who frequently appears before the court. The court has at times said that certain lawyers will not be given an audience. That itself will send a powerful message. Of course, the straightforward thing to do is to convert it into a petition, issue notice to the state government, and ask for a very fast reply. And within a week or so, there will be action taken. There is, of course, the classic option of saying that it's a letter. You want me to do something? Come with a petition. Therefore, just do not wait to be moved in an official manner.
Would you, Mr. Hegde, at this point see the various activity we have seen from what I call religious thugs in different parts of our country on Christmas Day and the days running up to Christmas, specifically against the Christian community? Is this to be seen as a larger picture of activity across the country right now? Are these stray incidents? How are you reading?
They're certainly not stray incidents. Let's put it this way, that over the last few years, we now have people who are better Indians and people who are Indians on sufferance. And if anything happens to those people who are not of the majority, then, well, there is a certain sense of almost asking for it. So whether it is namaz in Gurukram, whether it is the attack on churches, whether it is the frequent calls saying that, why don't you also come over to the majority side? That's exactly what it is. If you take them all together, the pattern is more than obvious. The pattern is of intimidation until there is an assimilation of sorts, willing or unwilling, that everybody then brands in under one religious label alone.
But is that even practical at this point, Mr. Hegde? Or are we just rabble-rousing before an election?
Yes.
See, listen, everybody doesn't contest an election. There are only politicians who will benefit from it. But I really think that the problem is not political, it is social. All your WhatsApp uncles and aunties who get radicalized over WhatsApp and 9 o'clock debates, they may not stand for elections, but they may very firmly believe that there are only one kind of people who are entitled to be called citizens of this country, who have a prior claim on citizenship of this country. That is what is scary. I was just talking to somebody else that, look, the problem is not with this government in as much, or the fight is not against this government. The fight is for the India that we are passing on to our children. Because if this continues, we are looking at great anarchy, irrespective of which government is in power. The attitude that because I am in the majority community, I can indulge in loud speech, in violence, and do just what I want to, and the rest have to put up with it. That is what breaks up a country. That is what it starts. It starts in thought, but it inevitably degenerates into action.
I want to bring this question to Mr. Azad. We've had also a former Indian Navy chief and a former Indian Army chief, make very strong comments about the videos that surfaced out of Haridwar. Let me quote former Indian Navy Chief Admiral Arun Prakash, who said, and I quote, "Why is this not being stopped? Our Jawans are facing enemies on two fronts. Do we also want a communal bloodbath, domestic turmoil, and international disgrace?" To which we had the former Indian Army Chief, General V.P. Malik, say, agreed. As someone who spent most of his adult life in service of country, Mr. Azad, what is your reaction to what we're seeing happening on various fronts in our domestic, tapestry at this point?
First of all, let me admire the ex-army chief and the Navy chief who have thought it right to comment on a serious development which is happening in this country. But let me also go back to Faye, what you had said earlier, and saying, isn't it all political? Yes, it is political. Let me also go back to the early 20th century also, because let's bite the bullet. Hindu-Muslim divide has been right from the beginning, from the early 20th century, whether it was Mr. Jinnah who wanted a separate Pakistan, a separate a nation for the Muslims. There is a lot of bad blood which has been created from both sides. There's no doubt about it. But the real, the battle which is happening in this country, and these Hindu senas and the various brigands which work, that is, the angst is mostly against the Muslims. This Christian thing is definitely a political one. In Karnataka, you talked about, there are a lot of, vitriolic speeches being made by various people. You referred to one. There are brigands which are moving in various places and focusing on that. Earlier on, it was Kerala, where there was a close, battle between the groups. Three groups: the Christian groups, the Muslim groups, and the RSS groups. But this being extended, the arc being extended to the country at various places is something very, very pernicious and is very, very serious. And therefore, in a case like this, what do we do about police action immediately in terms of communal riots? What happens is, unless there is a huge communal bust-up like in Delhi, the police does not seem to act. And the police papers over, tries to, do something like, begging the mullahs, begging the pandits, begging the churches, chiefs and all that to maintain some kind of unity. They don't want to take any action. This is because of the social fault lines we have created ourselves.
Do you think, and I want to refer here, Mr. Azad, to the letter written by the lawyers to the Chief Justice of India, where they have said very clearly this not just threatens the national integrity of our country, but it puts in danger the lives of a minority community, millions of Muslim citizens. Do you think the police doing this sort of negotiation on the ground, waiting for some activity to happen, might actually be dangerous at this point?
Absolutely, very, very dangerous. In fact, many people think that secularism means that you just allow anything to happen in the name of religion, which is wrong. Secularism actually means that you have to be very, very firm. First, to see that religion does not impact the statecraft, and all religious activities are controlled fully. In fact, it should not, any kind of religious activity should not affect a common man. In some cases and in some districts, there are people who are doing it. And there are shining examples of this. So to say that it cannot be done is also not correct. As Mr. Sanjay Hegde said, the clear instructions during any kind of a communal riot from the correct boss is shoot at sight and nip it in the butt. But once you let it fester, for example, the day the speeches were held, and the day such remarks were made, there are sections, 153A, 295, 505, there are so many sections. Immediately, if you arrest, even if it's a small section, it makes an impact. And therefore, at that particular, but there's another point which I want to say and bring to your attention and Mr. Hegde. Do you notice one thing? Why the whole thing is political? Look at the criticism of the opposition parties. They will talk in a muddled way. They will say law and order kharab ho gaya hai, paristhitiyan jo hai nirmit ho rahi hain, communal incidents ko बढ़ावा दिया जा रहा है. Nobody will say specifically, arrest karo inko, put these 5 fellows. Why? Because they're all vying for the same vote bank. Some have this problem of a particular vote bank, particular caste, and that is why I'll tell you all the parties are same. And Mr. Sanjay Hegde also said, the problem lies across the governments. It's not only this, it's the kind of a social setup we are creating, and we don't have officers who can stand up tall and fight against it.
Mr. Hegde, I want to bring you in on a couple of things. One is Mr. Azad's opinion that it has been decades, maybe more, that the Hindu-Muslim divide has been taken advantage of by politicians for their own benefit. The second point, Mr. Hegde, is this whole idea of waiting until something happens that we're seeing the police do and our politicians not being strong enough. In your opinion, and I know that you've been tracking politics for a very long time, has it always been this bad? We've had riots in our country before. We've had the divide. We're aware. But has it been this bad? Or are we going maybe in a direction that's a new low?
See, let me answer it by quoting Mr. Nariman. Mr. Nariman once pointed out that we had a magnificent constitution because the members of the Constituent Assembly were 80% Orthodox Hindus, with the President Rajendra Prasad, who was probably the most Orthodox of them, making a conscious choice. They made a conscious choice for a secular form of government,
yes,
and for protection of fundamental rights, and that everybody was to be treated equally. Why did they do that? We forget that the Constitution was finally signed in 1949, but we forget what the preceding decade was like. We forget that there was the World War, there was the Jewish Holocaust, there was partition violence, there was the murder of the Mahatma. So against a backdrop of great communal violence, which was inspired by religious and other forces, Our founding fathers took a conscious decision. We will not have this nonsense. And that's how the country went on for the first half of a century. About 2 generations went that way. And then people sort of forgot those lessons. It was so long ago that we've again started going back. And yes, there have been all this, from Jinnah's time, or even before that, from Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's time. Or you can keep on theorizing, and you can go back to the Mughals and pre-Mughals and to Muhammad bin Qasim, as our neighbors across the border do. But all that is useless. The basic thing is, at this particular point of time, what does your citizenship require you to do? And your citizenship requires you to treat every Indian, irrespective of caste, creed, religion, as your fellow citizen.
Yes.
And we do nothing which will spoil the civic peace. We are all stuck together in a very crowded space on this subcontinent. We really do not have the space, the time, the money to fight. If we start fighting like this, we are going to end up breaking this country. So for heaven's sake, just let's put all this stuff aside the way our founding fathers did. Say that all this leads nowhere except to destruction. And you start building India again.
Very well said. Mr. Azad, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that as well. I suppose this is the time for us as citizens of this country to reject this sort of thing and not go along with it. Mr. Hegde mentioned the uncles and aunties on WhatsApp or the ones who watch the 9 p.m. news, who might actually start to agree with the messaging that they hear. And that is really the biggest danger of all. We had one of our viewers who wrote in the chat window that unfortunately it's not being condemned on national channels as much as it should be. There isn't enough conversation happening where we as civil society are condemning this behavior. Do we need to see more of that, Mr. Azad?
I agree with you that people are not doing this on the national channels, but people like me and Mr. Hegde are doing, and there are people also now slowly who are voicing their concerns over this. And, the channels today are also divided along lines. Some of them think that everything the government does is wrong. And some channels think that whatever the government thinks, it should be, aired as a propaganda. And that is my serious problem. I think, how do we stop this? How do we go about it? It has to be, social media has to play a very, very important role. There's no doubt about it. In fact, I see it on Twitter and try to rein in some of my followers and all that when they get into this intractable debate which goes on and on, whether it's about Karnataka, whether it's about Uttarakhand, and you can see how people are exercised over the issue. And as far the radicalization of the uncles and aunties are concerned, the responsibility has to come from the citizen first. And let me tell you, the first thing is, why does a voter elect this kind of people? In fact, you'll see, Faye, that the most corrupt always win. You don't have to even name them, but you know exactly the people who have made maximum money are the ones who can win because they spend the maximum in the constituencies. The rabid religious kinds of people also have their solid vote banks and they never lose from their constituencies. So where do we begin? We begin from the voter. And how do we sort of inform them, sensitize them? One of the ways is, of course, speaking on channels, speaking on state TVs, through the newspapers, journalists, civil society. It should come because our democracy should throw up the best as representatives, not the worst or just, ordinary ones who don't say anything at all. And so I'm very shattered for the simple reason on the Haridwar issue or any issue, the opposition parties are also not coming so strongly. Yes, these 4 men should be arrested. Nobody talks like this.
There's no doubt about the fact that these 4 men should be arrested. Mr. Azad, also want to point out the double standard of the police in the fact that there have been other cases where they have thrown people in jail for the better part of a year for speeches that were not made, speeches that they suspected would be made, speeches that they couldn't draw, any sort of conclusion or any sort of connection between the violence that played out after. So the police has the ability to be very, very, shall we say, strict in its interpretation of the law. But in this particular case, it does seem to, that law seems to have some room for interpretation.
Absolutely. I agree with you. That, the worst part is, and you have rightly pointed out, the police has the ability to take unbiased and fair action. What I'm surprised is that, okay, we can blame the inspector. What about the SP? What about the DIG? What about the DGP? There are levels of supervision. What about the Home Secretary? What does he do? It's pushing files. What does the Chief Secretary do? Isn't he responsible for the state? He's the senior most civil servant. They only carry note sheets and files. And so how do we, but let me also assure you that there are people who stand their guts. I mean, in Maharashtra, you have a DGP like Siva, who's my batchmate and who comes in your channel. He's another one, a shining example of integrity, a shining example of following the law. So there are people like that. Unfortunately, what is happening?
Are there people like that in the force right now, Mr. Azad?
There are. I firmly believe that 30% in all sectors, all walks of life and all professions, they stand firm and they carry the load of the inefficiency of this 70% of the others. And it is only hoped that these 30% will perform, and they are performing in their own way, getting kicked out, superseded, all kinds of things, but they are still standing true to law.
Mr. Hegde, while we've commented enough about this, I do want to bring your attention to one other matter that has come up, the matter of the fact that the Missionaries of Charity, which is the order started by Mother Teresa in Calcutta, now functioning across the country, have had their bank accounts frozen over the last 24 hours on, incidentally, Christmas Day. So basically everybody who depends on the Missionaries of Charity at this point for medicines, for food, children who are currently living in the orphanages, don't have access to any of these things. Now, incidentally, the Ministry of Home Affairs put out a statement saying it wasn't us that asked for the accounts to be frozen. The MC asked for their accounts to be frozen themselves. It now turns out that the FCRA application for renewal of FCRA was denied on Christmas Day. As a result, the Missionaries of Charity can no longer use their bank accounts. Again, is there a larger tapestry of activity? Because what's happening as a result, Mr. Hegde, is that social media is now deep in a discussion of whether Mother Teresa was a good person or a bad person, which is, this is side effect, and this is how social media functions. But is there more to this, in your opinion?
Well, let me put it this way. Ever since the FCRA had all these amendments, it basically allows the government to say no to any NGO getting any kind of foreign donations whatsoever. And who will administer it? It will be the Home Ministry. Who in the Home Ministry? Ultimately, it will be some Babu. Now, which Babu is going to go ahead and say that, every Babu also knows the government has some favored NGOs and some not so favored NGOs. So when it's a not so favored NGO, it is safer to reject. And once they reject it, then I don't know as a matter of fact whether it was the Missionaries of Charity who asked the SBI to freeze their account or whether somebody else asked that the documents will soon come out. The point is that the FCRA currently requires you to have an SBI account into which all the money goes And then from there on, it can get allocated further, and you can allocate it subject to some very strict conditions and all that. So as a consequence, many international organizations or Indian branches of international organizations have more or less gone totally independent. They have refused to take foreign funds whatsoever. They have relied on Indian donors. But even in those cases, like Amnesty International, India, created a wholly Indian entity. But they did take a donation against which they raised a bank loan, but they kept the donation in a bank account. Even that, the government had a problem with. And it's very easy to shut down an NGO these days, saying that, look, you took foreign funds, and then you are not able to account for it. Again, the classic definition of tyranny, the ability to make a harsh law and to use it selectively on your enemies.
I'm going to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you so much for giving us your time. This is where we are. There are a series of hate speeches going out, going viral on the internet right now. The police has registered 1 FIR, no arrests have been made. The question is about the messaging that is being sent to the people making these hate speeches. Do we stand for it or do we not stand for it? As civil society, are we saying enough? We've heard our legal community come together and appeal to the Supreme Court in a letter asking the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to take suo motu cognizance and act immediately. But is the police doing enough? Is the opposition doing enough? And most of all, is the media doing enough? Are we standing together and saying this is not the country that the founding parents of our country envisioned for us when they wrote our constitution? Remember, they spent 3 years debating every single point of our constitution and the kind of country they wanted us to be. Have we done justice 70 years down the line to who we were meant to be? Or are we going to allow politicians year after year, decade after decade, to take advantage of fault lines in order to make political gains? Remember, and I've always stood by this, when things are really bad on the economic front, on the unemployment front, on the inflation front, on the healthcare and education front, on the hunger and starvation front, that is when politicians rely on religion, because it's an easy distraction. It is up to us, media and civil society, to focus back on the things that matter. Are our children receiving an adequate education? Are they still the largest number of hungry children going to bed hungry in this country tonight than anywhere else in the world? The truth is yes. Are the women in our country still fighting for basic rights? Yes, they are. Do we have adequate hospitals? Do we have adequate healthcare? No, we don't. Do we have the basic things that a citizen should expect from a country of a democracy, which is safety, clean air, clean water, education, and health? No, we don't. These are the things that our government would like to distract us from, especially when there is a big election coming up. We know better. We've grown up here. We should be able to reject this kind of filibustering. Thank you so much for watching. At exactly 9 o'clock, our news will be up again tonight. Do remember to subscribe to our channel and ask your friends and family to do so as well. It encourages us to do more of this work for you. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.